Hi everyone! My inquiry project is on writing in the 21st century. What is it? And in order to answer that question, I looked at attitudes toward multimodal composition. So why am I interested in this question? Why do I think it's worth researching and studying? Well, for me, I feel that as we move further and further into the 21st century, we have to reckon with the reality of composing today, in 2016, in this increasingly multimodal and digital world. And that led me to ask, what is writing in the 21st century? And to be honest, this question actually goes back to my time as an undergraduate, when I got deeper and deeper into my English program and became frustrated with research paper after research paper after research paper that I had to do. I began to question the relevance of that. And this is, we'll see later on in the presentation, but you can see in this quote from Richard and Cynthia Self that among multimodal scholars, this frustration that I felt then and even now is a pretty common thread. To quote them in full, they say, unless English teachers and teachers of writing begin attending to emerging multimodal literacies in self-sponsored communication environments that exist outside the classroom, the profession will become increasingly irrelevant to students, parents, and the public. And that word irrelevant is really key here because it's going to pop up in other quotes, and it gets at a lot of the feelings that I, as a student, felt, and also as a researcher felt. And I think because of that, it also injects a sense of urgency to a question that might otherwise be seen as speculative. And so just to give you a really short definition of multimodal composition before we move further into the presentation, then this is kind of an amalgamation of Cynthia and Richard Self's descriptions of multimodal composition. And it means to research, organize, and present information by selecting examples, media, and multiple expressive modalities. That's the key there. With the goal of creating an end product that's reflective of audience expectations and needs. And again, that's my own working definition. But I think it kind of encapsulates what we're going to be talking about here today. And I do want to clarify just briefly that the focus of this presentation is very much on digital composing, digital multimodality. But multimodality is not strictly in the purview of the digital age. It has a pretty long history going back to at least the 1960s, as Jody Shipka discusses, and you can see some examples here. So what are scholars saying? Well, as I started off, there's quite a bit of frustration, and that frustration is very much born out of a real appreciation for multimodal composition. These scholars see great value in multimodal composition, and they see it as essential to 21st century literacy. I think probably the most important quote on this page is from James Paul Gee, where he says, in the modern world, print literacy is not enough. People need to be literate in a great variety of different semiotic domains besides print. And you can see the definition for semiotic right here if you're confused on that. And so this refusal, or at least a resistance towards really incorporating multimodal composition as more than some kind of other in terms of literacy, and keeping it sort of less than print literacy, creates quite a bit of frustration. As you can see from Holisher, using words like clean and limited, and again the word irrelevant here, and then often a burden. So again, there's a clear pattern where multimodal scholars don't see the acceptance that they believe is warranted by the potential of multimodal composition. And there's also a lot of commonality that they discuss between the reactions within their own departments, and you'll see this a little bit later in the survey responses from teachers at Gardner-Webb. Jody Shipka has a great quote from a peer where she describes the response she got, which is, "How is that college-level academic writing? How can that possibly be rigorous? How can allowing students to do that possibly prepare them for the writing they will do in their other courses?" And she's actually describing a non-digital multimodal project there. But again, that's kind of the trend among reaction that the scholars that I looked at described. And just to give you a little background on the three scholars that I really looked at, Jody Shipka, Selfs, and Holisher, these are very much authorities in the realm of multimodality. They're kind of the big dogs. So for me, that their comments hold quite a bit of weight. And I think this section from Cynthia and Richard Self, again, really expresses the frustration among students, where they describe students producing essays that look much the same as those produced by their parents and grandparents. And this even comes up in composition pedagogies in the chapter on research writing, with the frustration of the research paper as a genre. So you can see these feelings are pretty widespread. And this is the survey I sent out to students. If you'd like to read it over fully before you listen to my discussion of the results, feel free to pause. And you can do the same here for the survey for the teachers. Among the results from the teachers, there were quite a few common trends. Like, they often find students have a mixed reaction to multimodal assignments, and what really stuck out there is one teacher described it as internalizing academic writing and all the rules of the genre, and I think that relates back to a lot of what the scholars are saying on the insistence on clinging to print literature. However, they see that as a challenge that can be addressed by really focusing on student reflections of their process. And again, as I've talked quite a bit about, there's definitely a divide between scholars, the ones that were just discussed here, and the teachers that I talked to, and English departments just as an institution. One great characterization from one of the teachers was, "That's nice and fun and all, but I have to teach them how to write a literary analysis, argumentative research paper, etc." And that's really the kind of condescending attitude that we were seeing with the scholars. And I think an important point was that I also learned from the survey is that there's still no multimodal requirement in the Gardner-led English department, which I do think reflects the priorities there. However, it was very clear talking to both teachers that they very much value multimodal composing. They call it an essential part of any composition course, and it was more than just real writing to them. There's also quite a few trends among the students that I talked to. And I do think it's good to note that there was a much broader range of attitudes among them, even though all the students found multimodal composition to be interesting and rewarding. They used words like amazed and liberating, but the older respondents did report a greater sense of unease, whereas the youngest respondent was much more comfortable talking about multimodal composition, and he had been exposed to it earlier. Both of the older respondents discussed this specific program as their first introduction to it. And also for any skeptics, I thought it was interesting and useful to note that the process of preparing for a multimodal composition piece and preparing for a traditional print research paper was very similar. One student even used the word identical. So, looking at the conclusions and questions of my research, it's very clear that my survey results and choice of scholars shows multimodal composition in a favorable light. And I'm afraid that reflects my own bias, because I see great value in it as well. And so as I move forward, I would really like to dig a little more and try to find an opposing viewpoint, because there always is one, and I think even if it's just to deconstruct their argument, you have to address the other side. But the big thing that stuck out to me, and that I'm very curious to hear responses on, is the pretty clear trend that age as a demographic really works as a dividing line in terms of attitudes toward multimodal composition, or at the very least, comfortability with multimodal composition. And having surveyed no one younger than 22, I'm really interested to hear from all the high school teachers in this program who teach teenagers, and who, even more than someone in their early 20s, have been more immersed in visual media and likely has been composing in multiple modalities for much longer, even if they do it unconsciously, perhaps even because they do it unconsciously. And so I'm very interested to hear what you think their attitudes are, or if you have any experience with their attitudes, because the assumption that I'm making based on the trends in my surveys is that they would be more open to the idea that multimodal text is equal to traditional black words on white paper text. And that could be a erroneous assumption. So I'm really interested to hear what your responses to that are. So thank you for your time.